What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Pack a Day podcast. I'm your host, Andy Herman. You can follow me on Twitter at Andy Herman NFL. Today's the day. Finally going to do it. I'm going to take a deeper dive into Aaron Rodgers. I want to talk about that Andrew Brandt article from Wednesday, discuss it, some things I agree with, some things I don't agree with. I want to talk about how I kind of foresee this offseason going. Really want to discuss what I think Green Bay may do, what Aaron Rodgers may do, as well as what ultimately I will do, which of course will give everyone the opportunity to say, I'm so thankful, Andy, that you're not the GM of the Packers, which of course we can all rejoice in. I think we can all respect the fact that Brian Gutekunst and these GMs have a ridiculously difficult job, and we can always armchair GM it. However, this is certainly not going to make me shy away from giving you my opinion on the topic, which I will get to at the end. I also want to quickly go through a few other topics that came up on Wednesday. I want to sort of go through these relatively quick because I want to spend the majority of my time talking about Rodgers. But before we get there, it seems like the Minnesota Vikings do in fact have their head coach. However, in a turn of events, it is not Jim Harbaugh who will return to Michigan, and instead it will be Rams offensive coordinator Kevin O'Connell. That cannot be finalized as of yet because, of course, O'Connell is still the offensive coordinator for the Rams and sort of has a Super Bowl that he needs to coach in first. Once that is done, Minnesota can officially name him as head coach. Maybe not the most ideal scenario, having to wait, until middle of February to name your head coach, and then very quickly. I know it's not like O'Connell is going to be getting ready like specifically for the draft. That's what your, GM, but they've got a new GM, right? Minnesota is going to have to sort of shotgun their approach to what they do in the draft with a new GM, a new coach, and it'll be here before you know it. So I don't think that that's necessarily ideal, but it's so much more important to get the guy that you want and make sure that you secure that first before worrying about any of those other things. This is a major change for the Vikings in coaching staff, in general manager, so they need to make sure that they hit this out of the park. Of course, as Packer fans, sort of hoping for the opposite, but Kevin O'Connell comes from that Sean McVay tree. We've seen that bear fruit in a couple different directions, obviously with Cincinnati right now, Zach Taylor, Matt LaFleur in Green Bay. So, and of course the Chargers. We'll see what happens with them as well. And certainly Staley's had some interesting coaching decisions. I love the way that he coaches football. I think that's going to have success over time. But this is going to be a brand new regime in Minnesota that is going to be, I believe, much more analytically driven. Bringing over, GM from the Browns as well as a head coach from the Rams, two very analytically minded teams. And I think, they're going to probably catch up to Green Bay pretty fast, especially with the way that Matt LaFleur does things and even that playing field. And Green Bay's just been ahead of sort of everyone in the division up to that point with analytics and sort of using those to their advantage. I'm not saying every team doesn't do it in some capacity, but Green Bay's been pretty darn good since Matt LaFleur's got here with that. So we will see how that affects Minnesota moving forward. But again, most importantly, Kevin O'Connell seems to be the new head coach in Minnesota. Meanwhile, from a Packers standpoint, as expected, Justin Outen goes to Denver and becomes the offensive coordinator out there, former Packers tight ends coach, which again now means that Green Bay has 3 openings, including quarterbacks coach, tight ends coach, and probably most importantly, special teams coordinator. So good luck to Justin Outen in Denver. He had high praise from a lot of the players, including the tight ends on his team. So that will definitely be a coach that they miss and will have to do their best to replace moving forward. And then the last note is, of course, the Washington Commanders. The name is bad. The jerseys are way worse. The helmet with the W on the front, they look like XFL jersey. I think XFL jersey is actually way better than what those look like. Not a fan of the name. Of course, they screwed up the reveal, and everyone saw it last night when NBC captured it on the mural inside the team facility. This is just a team that can't get out of its own way for the life of itself. And to me, the name, the jerseys, the color scheme, everything was just poorly done, and nothing should be surprising at this point. If you like it, you like it. You do you. Certainly not going to judge you for liking the name Commanders or the color scheme or the jerseys. That's just a taste thing. But for me, I'm not impressed with any of it. And it's just sort of classic Washington at this point. All right, moving on to the main topic. The biggest question of the offseason, certainly for Green Bay, I think probably the biggest question of the offseason was already answered in Tom Brady retiring. But biggest question of the offseason for Green Bay, will Aaron Rodgers be back in Green Bay? And this is one of those, another buckle up moments for the Packer fan base. My guess is this will be somewhat divisive as to whether or not some people want Aaron Rodgers back or whether they want to move on. I think a lot of this has to deal with potential compensation and how they feel about Jordan Love and all those sort of things. We'll get into all of that. But if you haven't had a chance, definitely go out and read Andrew Brandt's article. I believe it's on Sports Illustrated or SI, and you can kind of read his thoughts on the topic. And of course, very few in the world have, his background to be able to sort of disseminate some of the information that's going on and make an educated opinion based on that, based on what he went through with Brett Favre and Aaron Rodgers in that transition. So definitely worth your time. However, there's some things in there that I agree with and some things I don't agree with. I'm not going to go through everything ad nauseum. Again, definitely read the article, but there's 4 points here that I want to go over. The first that I sort of dispute is that he states in his article that the Packers made this aggressive move up for Jordan Love. All right. Maybe you can argue that, right? I don't see it that way, and I've mentioned this before. I don't think Green Bay made an aggressive move up for Jordan Love. They underpaid from a draft scale standpoint to make that move up in the draft. Giving up a late 3rd round pick, which was basically almost a 4th round pick based on where they were selecting to move up in the draft, was not that big of a deal. Actually, it was a 4th round pick. It was a 4th round pick because the 3rd round pick in that draft was Oren Burks, right? So it was a 4th round pick that they traded. Trading a 4th round pick up in the draft, that's nothing. Like, if you're not willing to trade a 4th round pick to move up that many spots to get whoever it is on your board, and I'm saying whoever, whether it's a quarterback, whether it's a wide receiver, whether it's a tight end, whomever, they, in all likelihood, they had one top guy left on their board. And if you're not willing to give a late 4th round pick, which is basically like a 5th round pick at that point, if you're not willing to do that, you don't like the player that you're selecting anyway. Like, they had obviously some faith in the grade that they had on whatever player was there. It happened to be a quarterback. It happened to be Jordan Love. I don't think they made an aggressive trade up. To me, like, if they are trading like 2 1st round picks or a 1st and a 2nd, or make this aggressive trade to the top of the draft to get a quarterback, that is an aggressive trade up. To me, in my opinion, what the Packers did is, in all likelihood, had one player with a 1st round grade left on their board. It happened to be Aaron Rodgers. They knew they could move up for a late 4th round pick, were willing to do so, selected Love, and the rest was history. That's what I believe happened. I do not believe this was some all-in aggressive maneuver. We have to get Jordan Love. And Brian Gutekunst has even mentioned the fact that they were really targeting wide receivers. And the wide receivers went off the board, and they went with best player available. And in order to get him, they felt like they needed to move up. And what they gave up was extremely minimal in the whole scheme of things. So I disagree with the fact that they were aggressive in moving up for Jordan Love. They did move up to get him. They didn't just stand pat, but I don't think there was this crazy aggressive move. He also mentions that he believes that at some point, without question, Jordan Love will play and be the starter for Green Bay. While I think that is the case, I don't fully agree with that. I think there are a lot of different scenarios that come into play where Jordan Love could not be the quarterback of Green Bay. I think scenario 1 is that Aaron Rodgers returns, maybe for 1 year, maybe for more than that, and that Jordan Love and his agent say, hey, we got to go somewhere where we can compete, and Jordan Love wants out. Also remember that Aaron Rodgers, in his press conferences in the past, said that he also, in some way, shape, or form, whether you believe him or not, was also looking out for Jordan Love and saying, like, hey, it doesn't make sense for both of us to be here. He could say, hey, if I'm coming back, you guys really need to do something with Jordan. They share an agent, remember. You guys need to do something with Jordan to make sure that he has the ability to start. And with a poor draft class and with teams in desperate need of quarterbacks, there may be a trade that they can make. I don't think it would be for like picks, but it might be like a player for player trade so that, because if some team's offering Green Bay a 3rd round pick, then Green Bay has egg on their face, because they selected him in the 1st round, didn't get anything out of him for 2 years, traded up to get him and got a 3rd round pick in return. That would look bad, right? But if you got a player whose value was roughly a 3rd round pick, but it doesn't look that way because it's a player for player deal, you maybe get away with that and not have quite as much egg in your face. And everyone in the fan base would just rejoice of like, wow, they took Jordan Love and got a player who can help this team compete right now. Most people would be happy with that and it wouldn't look as bad for Green Bay. But I could see that being a situation where Green Bay says, you know what, Rodgers is going to be our guy for the next 3-4 years and we're going to move on from Jordan Love. I also think there's a fact that even if Rodgers retires or gets traded, I think there's the potential. I'm not even saying potential. I would be shocked. I would be shocked if the reins were just wholeheartedly handed to Jordan Love and there was no competition. I would be pretty shocked in that. Whether that's a Marcus Mariota type signing as a free agent, whether you get a Drew Lock back in a trade from Denver, I believe there will be competition. Now, in either of those competitions, I think you're hoping, especially if you're the Packers, and certainly if you're a Packer fan, that Jordan Love easily wins that competition, or at least wins it. If not, you probably have bigger issues, but I don't think it's a foregone conclusion. And I think Matt LaFleur would put his best team out on the field. And if that, especially with the team they have right now, and if that's not Jordan Love, if that's Marcus Mariota or Drew Lock or whoever else they bring in, maybe, remember, Brian Gutekunst comes from the Ted Thompson tree. What did Ted Thompson do when Aaron Rodgers was ready to become the starting quarterback? He spent a second-round pick on Brian Braum and a seventh-round pick on Matt Flynn. He didn't shy away from grabbing quarterbacks. I wouldn't be surprised if Rodgers is gone, if Brian Gutekunst was aggressive in using another draft pick on a quarterback early in the draft. Until you find your king at quarterback, and I'm not talking Sean King here, until you find your guy at quarterback, you do everything you can to keep adding resources to that position until you find it. So I don't think it's just some foregone conclusion that Jordan Love ultimately becomes the guy. I do believe there are scenarios where he just isn't good enough to win the job, or that he's traded, or that something else happens where, again, he just doesn't end up as the quarterback of the Packers. So while I think at some point that is true, I don't think it's this be-all, end-all ultimate that Jordan Love is at some point the starter for Green Bay. He also mentioned that you can easily make the connection and connect the dots to Denver. I agree with that, and I'm going to get more on that in just a moment, but I do think that it does more than pass the sniff test of there are very few teams that make much more sense. We know Rodgers would want to go West Coast. We know that the Packers would want to trade him to an AFC team. We know that he would probably enjoy Denver. We know Denver is a quarterback away from legitimately competing, maybe even for a Super Bowl. We know that they have the roster and players to support Aaron Rodgers. We know that they traded away Von Miller and others to acquire picks to maybe be able to make a run for a player like Aaron Rodgers. Just everything. And then, of course, by the way, Nathaniel Hackett as head coach. And then, Justin Outen as your offensive coordinator. It's like, you can more than read the tea leaves to say there's enough smoke there to say that could happen. And I agree with that. More on that in just a moment. And then last but not least, he said he wouldn't be shocked if Aaron retires. I would be not shocked if Aaron Rodgers, I would be very, 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 very surprised if Aaron Rodgers retires. Now, no twist or turn would completely take me completely out of my realm of shockness with Aaron Rodgers right now. But with the fact that Brady's retiring, same retirement year, and the fact that he's coming off one of his worst playoff performances against the 49ers, and maybe most importantly is the fact that he has gone on record he's given his timeline in the past, and this wasn't it. That retiring this year was never in his timeline, and he's basically said pretty point blank, if I can play, I still want to play. He's just won MVP. He's not retiring. I would be shocked. I'm just going to flat out say it. I would be shocked if Aaron Rodgers retires. Again, anything can happen, yes. That would be by far and away the most surprising outcome of all of this. So that's what I agree with and disagree with. Go out and read his article on it because, again, he has some great insight based on his past, but that's what I agree with and disagree with. Now, I have been pretty steadfast going all the way back to when Rodgers came back right after, the airing of grievances, press conference, and everything like that. Every time I've been asked, I've said the same thing. I'm going to say it to you again today. You could ask me on any different day, and I might feel totally different on how I feel this Rodgers saga could end. I believe we will continue to get random reports and rumors and sources and everything else that in one moment you're going to be feeling like, crap, he could retire. And then the next you're going to be like, oh, he's going to Denver. And then the next it's going to be like, there's a mystery team that he wants to play for. And then the next it's going to be like, oh, there's no way he's not going to Green Bay. And I think there's going to be this constant stream of information, and every day is going to bring something different, and we will ebb and flow in a million different ways until we finally get to our final destination. And if we learned anything from this past offseason, we should learn to take everything with a little bit of a grain of salt and just sort of let the process play out and see what ultimately ends up happening. So again, there was reports on draft day that he had been traded to Denver last year. That clearly was not the case. So make sure you're vetting whatever, Twitter handle you're getting the information from. It was just yesterday that there were multiple blue check marks on Twitter that reported that Jim Harbaugh to the Vikings was a done deal. Take those things, carefully and just know that this is probably going to go in a few different directions until we get to our final destination. The greatest example is what radio station talking that Rodgers is buying a home in Nashville and that he's open to playing for the Titans. Like, okay, let's not put the cart before the horse. Again, these things are going to go on and on and on and on. And I think the best course of action as a fan is to not try to ride the waves, just take it steady one day at a time and ultimately see where Rodgers ends up. So I think there's ultimately a handful of different decisions here, right? One, what does Aaron Rodgers want? Does he want to play? Does he want to play in Green Bay? Does he want to play for another team? Number two, what does Green Bay want? Number three, do those two things match? And if number four, if not, then what do you do? And I think there's some of these answers that we somewhat know the answers to. All right. So first of all, what does Aaron Rodgers want? I think it's fairly clear. And I think he painted a pretty darn good picture of this on the Pat McAfee show. He wants to play for a contender. And in his press conference, right? He wants to play for a contender. He does not want to be part of a rebuild. He's at the point of his career where he's playing like an MVP, at least in the regular season, that he wants to go out and still compete for a Super Bowl. Now, I can understand that. Now, Green Bay made a lot of concessions to get him back last year and built this roster so that they could go out and make a run. And they had to borrow a lot from the future. So at some point, Green Bay's probably going to have to do a rebuild. But I think Aaron knows that that doesn't have to happen yet. And yes, he is right that Green Bay has the ability to maneuver things with the salary cap to still be very successful and retain a lot of their guys going into this season. But I think it's very clear, in my opinion, I don't think he wants to retire. And I don't know that he's made up his mind between Green Bay or somebody else. But I think he wants to play for a contender. And I think what he really wants is Green Bay to show him that they're going all in to contend once again this season. Now, what does Green Bay want? I've told you this in the past, I'm taking Green Bay at their word for now. I believe when Matt LaFleur says that Goody and Mark Murphy and Russ Ball and Matt LaFleur and that entire front office and coaching staff are in lockstep, that they want Aaron Rodgers back as their quarterback. Right now, I tend to believe them. I tend to believe that they know that there is still a chance to win a Super Bowl. I have to believe that when they watch the NFC Championship between the Rams and the 49ers, that they know that arguably they probably still have the best team. Now Tom Brady is gone from the division. Nobody else at this point is really just set to come up and compete for it. Jimmy Garoppolo may be gone from the 49ers for better or worse. There's going to be a lot of shakeup, but there's no reason that Green Bay can't be the best team in the NFC and clearly should be the best team in the NFC North. And I think that when you have that ability and when you have the ingredients to be a Super Bowl team, and yes, I believe Green Bay can keep enough of those ingredients to still be one of the top contenders in the NFC and for a Super Bowl next season, it's very tempting to want to bring that back. And ultimately, that's what I believe Green Bay wants at this point. Now, as mentioned before, Green Bay has incentive to say that regardless of what they want to do. If they say that, they can't come out and be like, yeah, we think we're going to move on, right? That lowers trade value. That makes them look like the bad guys. Everything is advantageous for them to say that they want Aaron Rodgers back. So in that scenario, you have to take it with some grain of salt. But just based on how Matt LaFleur said it and sort of went all in with it and said that everyone in the front office and in the building is on the same page, I tend to agree with him. And I tend to believe that he's telling the truth in that situation. So assuming Aaron Rodgers wants to be back and assuming Green Bay is that they have to make a decision in that situation, assuming Rodgers doesn't retire, there's really three different directions, right? One, Rodgers is back and they try to keep some pieces around him, build via the draft and maybe not borrow from the future and go all in, but do as best they can to sort of put the pieces together to still be very competitive. Number two, borrow a ton from the future, keep this team together, Last Dance 2.0, all in season once again, knowing that at some point this is going to come back to bite you a little bit. However, I do want to temper that a little bit, where people are freaking out and just being like, oh my goodness, they're going to go all in one more season and then it's going to be like a decade of terribleness. It could be a decade of terribleness, but it's not just because of that. There could be a swing in the franchise, no question, but you can pretty much take all of that, if once Rodgers is gone and you fix everything, there's maybe a season or two where you operate with a much lower salary cap and then you're back to even, and you can go on from there just like normal. So the Green Bay can get back to even and back to balancing their books pretty quickly after that entire situation is done. So don't think like if they decide to do this, that it's like, this is it, and then it's just 10 years of nightmare. There may be a couple years that are a little bit light, but you can live with that, again, especially if you can go out and have a chance to win a Super Bowl, and of course, if you ultimately do it. So that's option number 2. And then number 3, maybe Matt LaFleur doesn't want to call it a rebuild. I would call it a quick rebuild. That's your option. If you're being able to get 3 first-round picks, including the 9th overall pick from Denver, and get some really good young players, and being able to and build up that offense with young players and young talent, maybe see what Jordan Love can do, or have multiple draft picks moving forward to address that position, keep your defense together. I think you can do a very quick rebuild in Green Bay, get under the salary cap, not expose and take a bunch of money from the future that's going to really kill you down the line. Probably means moving on from Devontae, probably Aaron Rodgers, a Billy Turner. I think you probably kind of nuke the offense a little bit in that situation. And again, build it young is what I would do. And I've kind of gone over this in the past as well. Keep that defense together. And if you let Matt LaFleur build that offense in his image with Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon and a really good offensive line, I think maybe you can still put together a 20-plus point per game team. Well, your defense, if you bring everyone back, maybe sans Zadarius Smith, add maybe a couple guys in the draft, you could be a top 10 defense pretty easily. And that, to me, that's a formula to still win the NFC North, where you're building up a new young offense while also maintaining a really good defense and probably still competing for a playoff spot in an NFC North title. So I don't think that's the worst scenario in the world. And all of a sudden, I think you get back under the cap. Maybe you hit on a couple of those draft picks. Jerry Jeudy develops if you get him in a trade. And again, you let Matt LaFleur build this offense in his image. Meanwhile, Rashawn Gary, Kenny Clark, Elton Jenkins, Jair Alexander, Darnell Savage, these guys continue to develop. TJ Slayton comes up. I think you can have a really quick turnaround and be a really good team sooner rather than later. So I think those are the decisions. Again, you kind of go middle ground. You go all in, or you do a quicker rebuild. So all of that being said, what would I do in that situation? To me, and I've said this before, the biggest thing you cannot do is the middle ground. Give me the extremes. Go all in with Rodgers and do it again. And I can wholeheartedly understand the desire to do that. These opportunities don't always come along with a Hall of Fame quarterback who's still playing at a high level. I get the temptation to do that. I really do. And if that's the direction any of you want to go in, if that's the direction the Packers want to go in, zero complaints whatsoever. I totally get it, understand it, respect it. And I'm not even saying I wouldn't do that. It's a really legitimate option. I think it's a good option. And I don't think it's like this doom and gloom scenario that maybe some people like to think that it is. I would not go middle ground at all. I think that's by far and away your worst scenario. I think you're hurting the last of Aaron Rodgers' chances, and you're really hurting Jordan Love's potential. I just think you're just eating away at both ends, and nothing good is getting done in that scenario. Where I would ultimately lean is the quick rebuild. Now, a couple things in regards to that. One is that a lot of this depends on compensation, right? We're all thinking 3 first-round picks, the 9th overall pick, maybe Jerry Jeudy, maybe another top young player. Yeah, that sounds pretty darn good. But you see all these fake trade scenarios. We don't know. We simply don't know. Maybe it's 2 future first-round picks, and it doesn't include the 9th overall pick. Or maybe it's just the number 9 overall pick. That moves the needle a whole lot less for me than if it's this, package that you just simply can't refuse. So compensation is a big piece of that. Maybe it's more. Maybe it's 3 first-round picks, 2 young players, a couple second-round picks. Maybe it's an insane option, especially if you get maybe the Raiders and the Broncos competing against each other. Maybe it's more than we even think. Maybe it's significantly less. So I think that's the first thing that we have to understand. But assuming that it's a really good trade package, which I believe it would be, again, that's the way I'm leaning. The other caveat here is you have to understand if you do this, and again, that's what I'm saying I would do. As a GM, you have to understand that this could go very, very bad very fast. Listen, it is not easy to find quarterbacks. It just isn't. You've had that luxury for 30 years of having Brett Favre and Aaron Rodgers. If the Denver Broncos thought that, hey, we can do this, they, and find a young quarterback, they would use those 3 first-round picks, including number 9 overall and Jerry Jeudy and whatever other player would be involved in this trade, and they would trade for a young quarterback that they think could be the future of their franchise for a decade plus, rather than just 1 to 2 years. It's not easy. So yes, Green Bay could get in, have all their first-round picks, and the number 9 from Denver, 2 future first-round picks, a couple seconds, Jerry Jeudy, they could get the mother load. And there's no guaranteeing that Jordan Love or a Drew Lock back in a trade or whatever quarterback they ultimately end up with ever gets them to anything more than an NFC North title every now and again. You can be stuck in no man's land or worse for a long time. So you have to understand that going in. That being said, that's the direction I would still go in. I believe that there is wisdom in taking care of the salary cap and not going too far off the deep end. I think you sort of had your fun in going all in and bringing this entire team back and finding some real value free agents. You did everything. You did everything you were supposed to, maybe outside of building a little bit better of a special teams. You did everything. You had the players, you had the guys. And not only did it not work, you didn't win a single playoff game. And I think you can make an argument that trying to repeat that over is maybe not the best case scenario. Again, I want to go back to the fact that I get it. I don't hate it. If you want to go all in again, I totally get it. And I'm probably even for it in some capacity. But I think if you can now cut back on the salary cap, get a mother load for Aaron Rodgers, especially if you can also do a franchise and trade, which again is a little bit sketchy with league rules, but if you can get away with that as well and pick up picks for Davante Adams, probably release some guys on offense, keep that defense together. And all of a sudden, let's just say for a second, this is what I would do personally. If you get that number 9 pick in, there's no chance in heck I'm taking anyone in the top 10. I want another Saints deal. I want to try to get down in like the late first, early second round and pick up a first round pick next year. Now you've got and I would even potentially look to pick up more draft capital next year. And again, you're getting something for Davante Adams as well. Now all of a sudden you do that. And now you've got Denver's first, your first, and then another team's first for moving back in the draft. You could have maybe 3-4 first-round picks next year. Not to mention, potentially a couple, late first or early seconds this year. You've got some players like a Jerry Jeudy, maybe a Noah Fant, something like that. I don't think Fant, but probably like Big O, Albert. I'm not even going to pronounce his last name, but Big O, like their tight end they selected in the 3rd round last year, who's got a ton of athletic ability. They could go in that direction. Like, I think they could add some young pieces. And again, you keep that defense together. You add a ton of young pieces. You let Matt LaFleur build this offense in his image. And all of a sudden, you've got a couple late first-round picks this year, maybe 3 or 4 first-rounders next year, depending on how you navigate that. 2 first-round picks the year after that. Plus, with young talent already on your roster, like Rashawn Gary and Kenny Clark and Jair Alexander and Elton Jenkins, amongst many others, I think you can get back to the promised land very fast, assuming that you can at least get a top 16 quarterback, somewhere in that range, top 18. You put a team with a ton of talent. Look, Jimmy Garoppolo was almost in the Super Bowl, and he was just a couple years ago. Jared Goff has been in the Super Bowl. Those teams weren't far away from winning it. Like, there is a scenario where you can do that and be super successful. That is the direction that I would head with. But again, the thing I will leave you with is there is a ton of risk in doing that. And also, remember that with risk comes a lack of job security. The longer that Aaron Rodgers is here, the longer that Brian Gutekunst and Matt LaFleur and Russ Ball and Mark Murphy and all of them have job security. He goes, and you end up with a bust as a quarterback for 4 years. Everything blows up very fast. And your cushy job as GM and head coach of the Green Bay Packers that looks really great right now doesn't look so great. So there's a lot of risk that goes with that. That's the direction I would still go. I can understand both sides. I think it's going to be a really interesting offseason. I can't wait. And the last thing I'll say, if you're starting to look for tells as to what's going to happen with Green Bay, just start looking at if they start restructuring players and it's pushing money into the future and freeing up cap, they have to do that in some capacity no matter what. But if it gets aggressive where you're looking to and all of a sudden they tag Davante Adams, you're going to be able to start reading the tea leaves pretty quick. They're going all in again. So I think we're going to know a little bit based on the moves that Goody makes early in this process. If this is an all in, this is sort of a halfway, or if you don't see much of it, it could be a tell that maybe they're going to go in a different direction. Thank you so much for joining me. Always appreciate it. I'll be back here tomorrow with an all new episode. But until next time, and as always, go Pack Go.